Greetings, everyone. I am very thrilled today to be in conversation with Ron LaPlace, who I met on Veda Austin's Ancient Mysteries webinar that we both participated in. And we're going to be talking today about sacred geometry and sound healing and some of the phenomenal work that you do, Ron. So let me briefly introduce you and then we'll dive into our conversation. Ron has, for almost 3 decades, been teaching the principles of sacred geometry and how this can lead to the opening of the heart and a balanced relationship between the heart and mind. He's a certified teacher of awakening the illuminated heart and assists others to find their grounded center of being and purpose. And for 2 decades, he's also been teaching and developing new ways of working with sound to help us come back into balance physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And I'm just so excited about some of the cutting edge work that you're doing, Ron, with sound healing. But before we get into that, I would love to talk about you have such a deep understanding of sacred geometry and how that's woven into all of life. So can you talk some about how you got into that exploration and some of the insights that you've come to?
Thanks, Heather. What a pleasure to have this discussion and to get to know you a little bit. I have enjoyed thoroughly watching many of your videos and the wealth of knowledge that you're sharing by bringing individuals into connection. You are becoming a hub for connecting such varied levels of consciousness. And I thank you for that. And I appreciate this opportunity as well. Sacred geometry. Perhaps the best way I can begin is to explain what happened to me in this lifetime. At a fairly early age, at 18 years of age, I dropped out of university and entered a course of study in metaphysics. And I did that because I felt it, even at the age of 18, I knew that I was finding the system too containing. And I wanted to be connected with information at a level that was more expansive. And so I went deeply down that rabbit hole. And of course, metaphysics is really the science of everything. So it's a big rabbit hole. And I ended up literally cramming information into my brain I'm going to mention that the shift in all this happened when I was 47. So that's almost 30 years. And that's literally what happened. I was cramming information into place. I came in contact with a line of information, and I'll mention names perhaps a little bit later, but what ended up happening was that was an introduction into sacred geometry. And we'll talk a little bit about what that might mean. What ended up happening for me in that journey was through the connection to sacred geometry, something happened, and I'm going to describe it literally the way it happened. I had a moment when, because of an understanding, a logical understanding of the way that nature works with geometry, I understood for the first time in this life, through my left brain, the unity of all life. That moment, here's what happened, literally. Oh, I get it. And that's the left brain speaking. Immediately, the right brain responded and went, oh, thank God.
I knew it all along.
Yes, exactly. And the two had a place to meet, and they did. And so I'm experiencing that moment, and all of a sudden I feel a doorway open, and I'm speaking literally. That doorway went from here to here. Boom. And all of the information that I had stored for those 30 years found a home in a way that it never had before. So perhaps you can feel what I'm feeling in just describing that. It was such a revelation that it just changed everything in that moment. And it changed my path in life. It changed everything about me in that moment. It was, now I had a grounding for all that I had been just placing as information, now had a home.
That is really profound, Ron. I mean, you're describing a weaving together of left brain, right brain. You know, we've got this corpus callosum that bridges the two, but we've been, as humanity, really across the last 5,000 years, very left brain dominant. And
Yes.
part of what I think is shifting with the movement into the Aquarian age is reconnecting right brain ways of knowing with left brain analytical mind. But what's profound in what you're describing is how, with that interweaving, it really dropped you back into the heart.
Yes.
And the heart, I think, is what holds the unity consciousness
Yes.
that integrates it all.
Absolutely. And I didn't understand it at that time fully. Perhaps I still don't. I mean, how can we really understand unity in the present form that we're occupying? We have to remain somewhat removed in order to be here. However, I understand the unified field now in a much bigger way because of the experiences since then, which is 25 years. Yes. So that put me on a course of becoming what I was in the beginning of a course called The Flower of Life when that moment happened. And the Flower of Life is involving, through the teachings of sacred geometry, primarily at that time, the understanding of something called the Merkaba, the light body. And so I was going through that process, and that's when I decided, after having that experience, that I needed to become a teacher of that information. And so I did, and taught that from that moment, 1998, when I became a teacher, until 2011, I taught the Flower of Life. The Flower of Life shifted in 2011 to becoming something now called Awakening the Illuminated Heart. And that shift represents the Flower of Life being taught in primarily using sacred geometry in the form that worked for me, which is it's a masculine way of understanding the unity of all life. However, there is another way, of course, and that's the feminine. And so this is interesting. This course that I teach now, called Awakening the Illuminated Heart, was originally taught in the early 1980s. And at that time, the information was brought out in this feminine way. And what they found out very quickly was that the feminine, women primarily, got the information. But the masculine, men primarily, did not. They couldn't get it. for the precise reason that I described. My left brain needed to know something. It needed to trust something. It needed to be able to join together with this other side and say, oh, together we can understand something. And it wasn't until 2011 that consciousness was ready for the information that originally taught in the early 1980s to come out again in that feminine form. Consciousness is now ready for that. That says something about what's going on now in life.
So you're talking about more right brain ways of knowing versus left brain ways of knowing when you talk about that feminine, masculine? Is that what you mean?
Yes, and I'll describe that even in more detail. Doing the Merkaba, the activation of the light body in the left brain way, actually meant that it was done through the mind, which was primarily, this is a whole discussion. I don't know if this is where you intended to go today, but here we are. The Merkaba was absolute essential information for consciousness at the time it was introduced. It was actually Mother Earth who requested this information to come back into consciousness. Why? Well, again, that's a whole discussion, but in simple words, Mother Earth is going through her evolution with the sun. You have shared this information in so many different ways. This must happen. It will happen. And Mother Earth, knowing that, knew that this information, which is around the activation of a level of being in relationship with life that allows you to be in a much deeper relationship with life, the activation of the light body. That was lost at a time period you've discussed in many different ways with others. That was the end of Atlantis. And the almost total destruction of the place we're living on. That was a knock to consciousness, a blow to the head, you could say, of such a force that we forgot who we are, where we came from, and our relationship with God. These things happened. And we forgot about our ability to be in a much deeper connection with all of that, which I'm describing as the Merkaba. It was time now, through this introduction of information, primarily by a man named Drunvalo Melchizedek, the understanding of the flower of life and sacred geometry. I mean, there's much deeper ways of dealing with that now. Drunvalo narrowed it down into really lovely basic form, which is the way that I had my awakening, and so many others did as well. It had to be masculine at that time, because in order to bring balance, sufficient balance into consciousness at that time, the masculine needed a lot of help, and sacred geometry provided it.
And can you talk more, Ron, about the sacred geometry of the flower of life, which, is so profound? And part of what you're talking about is the fall of Atlantis that occurred. And as you know, I talk a lot about the precessional cycle and how that relates to the Yuga cycle, the time of ascending consciousness and descending consciousness.
Yes.
And that was that critical time about 12,000 years ago where we went through this cataclysmic reset.
Yes.
And now have been, on this journey of evolution of consciousness to where we are now. And so much is coming back into our awareness now as we're in this process of ascending consciousness and moving out of the time of forgetting and disconnection. But the flower of life, as you and I have talked about, is in the Osirian temple in Egypt, dating back 12,000 years. It's like some of those at that time who held that advanced wisdom were trying to encode it in some way to remind us in this time now. But can you talk more about the flower of life?
So the flower of life is not just in the temple of Osiris, it is in hundreds and thousands of other places. It's actually visible when you first discover something, then you find it's everywhere. And of course, that's what sacred geometry is all about. It's about the discovery of the forms that are natural to this creation that we live in, and how everything is brought forth through these forms, which are a level of geometry. And it's as simple as a geometry like a tetrahedron. This has 4 sides. It has 1 angle and 1 length. And this is one of 5 shapes that are known called the Platonic solids that have those characteristics. But when I show you this, I'm showing you something that's masculine. It's all straight lines. Nature doesn't use straight lines. However, nature contains the masculine. If I was to show you, I have props at home, but not here. So I have this same shape by gluing 4 ping pong balls together. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, what's happening is that's a feminine shape that has the masculine within it, because if you take straight lines from the center of each of those ping pong balls, you're going to end up with this shape. So nature has both within it. And so the flower of life is using the circle, which you could also say is a sphere. When you look at something 2-dimensionally, you're looking at the image of the circle. But understand that everything also represents in 3 dimensions. It has depth as well. But the flower of life, this is, I'm going to say something that I have no way of actually demonstrating in our limited conversation today. What the flower of life is the way, the form that was used to bring all of creation into this reality. And in the temple of Osiris, there is that form, and it's all over the earth, offering that same message wherever it is. Through the understanding of that, so I mentioned Jubilo. There are 2 books called The Ancient Secret of the Flower of Life. There's a volume 1 and a volume 2. They were written in the late 1990s and released in, I believe, 2000. And this simple way of understanding what I'm describing is available in those 2 books. They're still available. And I recommend for anyone who's interested in this to go there. And there are other people teaching sacred geometry now all over the place. And many of them are going to a much deeper level, which is wonderful and fine. But I find for those who want to learn the basics, those 2 books offer great support. And so what happened as we came to a level of consciousness now where since 2011, this information can be learned in a different way. And it's really done by connecting to a specific place in the heart instead of through the brain. And what happens then is when you use that connection to remember, notice how I'm saying not create, but remember the Merkaba, that activation changes the way you create. That may sound hard to believe, but I think the simplest way to explain that is to say, when we create from the mind, because the mind, you mentioned the left, the right, and the corpus callosum, the mind is a divided instrument. It can come together, as it did in the case I spoke about. And what happened when it did is it opened a pathway to the heart. When we connect to that place that opened up for me, and begin to live from there, we're talking about now living in the unified field. When we create from the mind, we create in polarity. Whatever we create, we are not just creating what we intended, we're creating its opposite as well.
Mm.
If the world understood that, it would change everything. If you spend your whole life creating peace from the mind, do you understand that you're creating its opposite as well? You have to be.
That is profound. I want to just take a moment and pause there, Ron. That is really profound.
Mm.
So part of what you're saying in that is not only do we need to be creating from the heart and not the mind, but really understanding that polarity and duality within us.
Yes.
To not be
Yes.
caught in our own illusion that we can somehow from our minds create a reality that is unipolar.
Yes.
But you're
This is
also
what,
saying there's a whole way of knowing, experience, and being and creating when we come from the heart that is a whole different energy.
yes. You cannot build a United Nations from the mind. It's not possible. All of these things are, I mean, I'm trying to describe things as simply as I can, but these are profound concepts. As all simple things, everything that is profound is indeed simple. But in order to understand it, that's when it becomes complex. If you can just go in the heart and feel it, do that. That's the simplest way of all. When we create from the heart, we are creating from the unified field. Now, the heart is, of course, there's complexity to the heart as well. But the heart is one of the places in the body where the unified field has remained, regardless of what happened to us when our consciousness took that big hit at the end of Atlantis. We still have these places in the body where the unified field exists. In Chinese medicine, they know of a place at the very center of the body that where they say in their tradition, Wuji exists, which I term from my metaphysical background, I call that the great void, the place from which everything has come from. And in the Chinese tradition, they say that there were 8 rivers that flowed out of Wuji. They call them, so we're talking waters again. Mm. Our connection with Veda Austin comes in.
Is that center the Don Tien, Ron?
Well, I'm going to give it another name. I'm going to call it what in another way in the Egyptian mysteries is known as the 8 original cells, because it's the place that in the 3rd cellular division you end up with. I'm going to show a little progression here. If it's okay, I'll do a share screen. So what you're looking at is what's going on in the womb after the zygote splits into 2 cells and then into 4. They form a geometry. And if you really want to go into this and look at, let's say, laser microscopy, or the photographs that are taken at a very small form, you'll find that this is documented in science. It's not just an amorphous blob as it's forming. This is happening in geometric form. And right in this particular grouping, you're looking at a tetrahedron, that little shape, and it's got the point facing downward. It can point one way or the other, and that determines the sex. Well, okay, I'll move to a different photograph now. So now you're seeing an image where the 4 cells now have split into the next level, 8 cells. And so you're looking at 3 dimensions in a 2-dimensional image here. And those 8 cells pack together in a shape called a star tetrahedron, where the 2 tetrahedrons have united together. And so in Chinese medicine, they talk about, so I'm going to get rid of this for now. They talk about Wuji. They talk about the 8 rivers that flow from Wuji. And they give them a name. They're called the 8 extraordinary vessels. And they are indeed extraordinary, because they are the pathway in of course, the I Ching. They're the Bagua. They're the 8 original pathways for the formation of the energetic and the physical body. And of course, then you can go further out in the I Ching to the 64 pathways, and through the source that you told me about, Robert Comer. He was talking about the addition of another octave, another 8. Anyway, so we have from source, Wuji, the great void, we have these 8 pathways. Well, in the formation of the physical body in the womb, the zygote becomes the 2, becomes the 4, becomes the 8. And when it's 8, it forms, in the masculine form, the star tetrahedron, 8-pointed star. And so the 8 is common. Those 8 rivers become 8 cells. And that, in the Egyptian mystery school, is known to be the foundation for everything that we are in this form. Just as in the Chinese way, the 8 extraordinary vessels are known to be that. So that 3rd cellular division is formed. Now there's something else about that I'm going to do a share screen again.
Can I just ask you really quickly, Ron? You said the star tetrahedron is the masculine expression. Is there a feminine expression that's a different geometry?
Right. So that image I showed you would be that. And I'll show it again with that understanding. So there is the feminine form. Within the zona pellucida in the womb, those 8 cells now are the feminine form of that. but the masculine's contained within it, right? All you have to do is through a straight line, draw a straight line from the center of each of those 8 cells, and you've created the star tetrahedron that I showed you.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And we all have both within us.
Yes, always. Yes, life, it just uses these forms. Now, I'm going to show you something. So that looks like a square. In the little picture of us, I can show you the image of a square. When I hold the star tetrahedron in a certain orientation, you can see the square, which is also a star tetrahedron. But I'm using this image to show you that within these 8 cells, when you see it from a square, you can see, well, A and B are just a way of describing that the cells themselves are holding a place for another sphere within the center. That's where the great void is. That's where Wuji is, within the 8 original cells. So we started this conversation by saying that the unified field exists within us, and it does in certain places. In the heart, you said the Dantian. I'm going to say it's actually a very specific place. The 8 original cells are, in Chinese medicine, the width of your thumb above the perineum. In other terms, you might call that the root chakra. And so the other place where it absolutely is in the pineal. Those 3 places. Those are the 3 treasures.
Beautiful.
Yes.
Wow, the way you're weaving this together, Ron, is so profound.
Yes. And so the connection now to the unified field, one of those places in the heart is the transformer. We have, of course, this place at the 8 original cells. We have the pineal. This is the heaven and the earth coming together. Where does it come together? It can only happen in the heart. And so that's why when we enter this space in our heart and create from there, what we bring into creation has no polarity. And so in this discussion we're having, that's what's important to understand. Now we can create in a different way. It is not polarized. If we create in that way, we can create in unity. So it changes everything, Heather.
It changes everything. It changes how we create. And it also, from my perspective and the research that I'm exploring through the Heart Math Institute, it changes how we know and how we experience the reality around us. I mean, some of the cutting edge research that they're doing, which I'm sure you're aware of, is blindfolding people, having them awaken and tune to the heart. And they're discovering, you talk about the connection with the unified field, they're discovering that people can know what's going on around them, colors of things that are presented to them, or shapes, by attuning to that knowing through the heart.
Yes, indeed. So HeartMath is one of the organizations that is assisting the left brain to understand the unity of all life. And this is what consciousness needs in order to be able to make that connection that I described, where the left and the right brain can come together and agree on something which allows us to drop into the heart. And so all of these methods, all of these things, all of the guests you're talking to in one way or another are doing the same work that I'm doing. Yes. And that is to help consciousness feel safe enough to drop into the heart.
So in your work and in what you teach, Ron, how are you supporting people in awakening the heart?
There's two primary methods. When I teach the awakening, the illuminated heart, and there are other teachers as well, probably several hundred around the earth. When I teach that, we are teaching about the space within the heart that I describe. And in a 4 or 5 day process, helping people to touch that space and enter it. Once you found it, you will know a frequency of that space and you can return to it. All of that depends on how much you have begun the work of understanding what keeps you from being in that space all the time, which is essentially the trauma, the emotional issues, all of those things that so many of us have been working with to help people heal. Because in order to be in that space, you have to, first of all, trust life in some way so that you can enter a space that doesn't know fear. And to begin with, trust is the only way to do that. But what trust leads to is knowing eventually. It's not about trust. Many people in their lives at some point will take on a practice. And what I've learned is that at some point you have to stop practicing and being.
Mm.
And that's when you move from trust into knowing. Because at some point when you know, you no longer practice, you are it.
Mm.
So this then becomes a way of life. And one by one, as we begin to know this is who we are, we begin creating from the unified field. And that has a ripple effect into life. And so that's the point of doing something like awakening the illuminated heart. And that's one way. I'll just briefly touch on the second way. And that is one of the ways that I found to be the most proficient. It was just something I was guided to do. And I'm sure many others have the same way of entering that field. And that's sound healing.
Mm.
It's becoming more and more known that frequency and vibration have profound ways of healing very quickly and very efficiently without having to relive the trauma. We can begin now to go deeper into ways that allow people to move through the work of healing all of that in much more efficient ways. We don't have to cut anything out typically, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with Western medicine, but it's not always necessary to go through the practice of removing items in order to heal.
I so resonate with what you're saying, Ron, in that, as you may know, one model of healing, integrated healing, that I've developed with Christina Lee, the Arch model, is integrating that shamanic understanding of the medicine wheel, which is sacred geometry, and how you come to center. So our experience, and the astrology chart's also a medicine wheel. So our experience is all those energies around the wheel, whether it's a astrology birth chart or our life experience. But when we can come to center, where we're in that alignment with the earth and sky and our heart, we connect to that unified field that can hold all of that complexity and diversity of all of our life experience.
Yes.
Which is what you're describing. And part of what's powerful in what you're saying is it also fits with that shamanic understanding of remembering our soul song.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what you're saying is once we know that frequency, we have that music, that song, that frequency within us. And we know when we're discordant, we're out of alignment with that. And we can feel it when we're back in alignment with that. And if my understanding is correct, when we're in that frequency, then we're in tune with the frequency of the earth.
We're in relationship with life. Yes. Every indigenous ceremony that I've ever been part of begins with the creation of the medicine wheel, not necessarily stones on the ground. It is the medicine wheel that you are building by connecting with the essence of the four directions within you. Yes. Yeah. And so primarily it begins by first connecting to the earth. And then through that connection, inviting in the connection to Father Sky. So Mother Earth, Father Sky, whatever Father Sky means to you, I personally connect through the sun. And when I say through the sun, I mean to the spiritual center.
Yes, me too.
Yes, the central spiritual sun. And when I do that and bring that into my heart, that's the place that you've described. That has a frequency, that has a vibration. And if you can connect to that once and remember the frequency of that, what's the sound, what's the feeling, you can go back there.
So you're really describing too how being in that frequency and aligning with the earth and sky is activating all those three centers in our bodies: the root chakra connecting to the earth, the pineal gland connecting to the sky, and coming to center in the heart.
These are the doorways, and all doorways lead home. Yes.
Talk more about what you're doing with sound healing, Ron, because it's extraordinary how you and I both have had training in working with the frequencies of the planets and how we can then be attuning to that and working with those energies in a healing way. But you're doing extraordinary work with that.
Thank you. The way that we are actually connected, we didn't know this until we started talking a few months ago, was that I have been a teacher of a process called acutonics, and you have been a student. And acutonics is a profound way of connecting a number of disciplines together, and through the use of sound. They are using tuning forks on the acupuncture points on the body. And the tuning forks are tuned to the frequencies of the planets. A natural place for you to enter a study. So let's take the earth, for example. If we want to ground and we use the frequency of the earth, how do we do that? Well, what is the frequency of the earth? If we know how long it takes for the earth to travel around the sun, that's a frequency. That frequency, 365.242 days, can be turned into a number that represents a connection to how we experience sound. And that's through the knowledge of hertz, the frequency or vibration that sound creates. When we know that, by knowing the number of how long it takes for the earth to go around the sun, we can create how we would hear that sound by simply changing octaves. We start with that very big number, 365 and a quarter. It's turned into seconds. That becomes an enormous number. And then we simply change its octave. You divide in half, you've moved it an octave. You do that so that you come into the range of hearing, and then you find a tone then that becomes the base tone, the base frequency. And for the Earth, that tone is 136.1 hertz. You can, if you wish to, you can take that down an octave into another octave lower to 68.05. Now, when people hear that sound, you probably noticed this when you first connected to that sound yourself. Maybe let me know what you experienced. Many people are saying, oh, well, that's Om. And you know what? It is. Because all over the earth, whether or not people knew the math of it, they had found the same thing. Did the Aborigines do their original didgeridoo, which was tuned to that frequency? Did they do that using math? Or did they connect to the heart of Mother?
Yes. And knew the frequency.
Did the Indians, when they did the drone string on the sitar, did they do the math? They may have, because they had really sophisticated mathematics. Or did they connect to the heart of Mother? And so when you understand that, well, then you can go throughout the heavenly bodies and do the same thing. All you have to know is how long it takes either for a heavenly body connected to our sun, how long does it take for it to go around the sun? And you can create a frequency for that. And so Accutonics did that for a number of things and connected it by applying those frequencies to the acupuncture points on the body for treatment, using not just the information of Chinese medicine, but connecting it to the information of what you would call the mythology of the planets.
Mm-hmm.
What are
And
the
they're
archetypes?
they're archetypal energies.
Yes, yes. And so it's a beautiful marriage. And for a long time, I taught that information as well. And then at a certain point, something else happened when I realized I had been teaching Accutonics, and in most of my classes, at some point, I would say, you know, I'd hold a tuning fork and say, you know, at some point, we're going to drop these and begin to use these. And so it came time for me to do that. And what I did was I created a way for making the massage table that I was using, making that the instrument that delivered the frequencies. So the massage table now becomes a speaker that people are laying on. And the frequencies are not coming from the instruments of the tuning forks. It's in the table. They're being played through the table. So the whole body is being influenced by the frequency.
And bathed in that frequency.
Yes. And I use these to make the human to human connection on the acupuncture points. And the method that I do that involves the use of the 8 extraordinary vessels of Chinese medicine, going into a direct connection to the 8 original cells at the root chakra, and what's at the center of those. That's probably the most important thing I can describe. So again, I have this image. I'm going to actually show just a little 15-second movie and just watch what happens. These are the 8 original cells, and watch what happens. So what we're seeing here, can you see that okay, Heather?
Yes, beautiful.
What has it revealed?
The heart of the center.
And that center is spherical, and it is the great void. It is Wuji.
Wow.
And so when I'll stop sharing again. When a person is laying on the table, And I'm working with the points of the acupuncture system that relate to the 8 extraordinary vessels. I'm also playing frequencies that are tuned to something called the Fibonacci sequence in sacred geometry. This is a whole other discussion, but essentially using the Fibonacci sequence this is how life, it's the form that life uses for growth, for expansion. And so it uses the form of the spiral, and the spiral is everywhere in nature. I sent you a little movie that demonstrates that beautifully. And perhaps as an addition to this discussion, you might add that YouTube link so people could watch that. It's called Nature by Numbers. And it's just a beautiful right brain way of experiencing sacred geometry. So I'm playing sounds that are tuned in a way that allows sound to contain the Fibonacci sequence. And in doing so, with intention, I'm taking that to what's at the center of the 8 original cells, in the center of the body, not just the physical, but the energy body. We're going back to the unified field that exists within you.
It's so exquisite, Ron. It's like you are in that way. And again, it's below the level of mind, below the level of consciousness. It is through frequency reminding us of our origins.
Actually helping us to feel the place in our body where that still is. It always has been. It never left. And then we add in some things that are old and new. I guess there's just a couple more slides. If it's okay, I'll just share this.
And you have to weave in Chiriclo at some point because.
Oh, yes, there it is, right there on my page. But before that, I want to show you this. What's that? That's an image from the Temple of Dendara.
Yes.
In Egypt. What are we looking at? You know, what is that? What is that snake? What's going on here? Well, okay, so I'm going to drop this image and bring up another. That's the modern day version of what we just saw. This is a plasma field being generated through the use of Tesla technology. And so this is also, that's the next level of what I've added to the sound healing. I'm introducing the sound frequencies into this plasma field and taking those 2 tubes that you see and putting them at either end of the massage table. So the sound isn't just now at the base of the massage table, it is also being induced into the plasma field. That plasma field is meeting at the center of the table, and at that place it creates this very sacred form in sacred geometry. It's called the Vesica Piscis, and that's the place of creation. So that is taking what I'm describing and amplifying that to a whole other level as well. And plasma, as you know, through the work of Robert Temple,
Yes,
and others, is we are exploring now a new frontier in life as we go deeper into this connection and understanding of plasma.
and that plasma is throughout the cosmos and really holds that cosmic consciousness, emanates it. So it's extraordinary how you're weaving that in with sound frequency to bring people back into alignment.
Yeah. To offer it to those who are ready. Yes.
And this is Spirit Tech. I'm going to include that link below, Ron. It's just really incredibly on this new frontier with how we can work with sound healing and frequency to bring us back into our hearts, bring us back into connection with the unified field, bring us back into connection with the source that is in us and all around us.
Yeah.
But before we end, you're also bringing in the frequencies of some of the new dwarf planets that we're discovering and the healing centaurs. So we've got to end with
We
the
got it.
incredible, beautiful sacred geometry of Cheroklo.
We have to. I'll go back here one more time and expand this amazing discovery chart for the centaur asteroid known as Cheroklo. One day, my partner Dorothy brought me information. I hadn't seen this particular chart, I don't think, at that time. But she brought me the information on Cheroklo, and we were working on a workshop that would introduce new ways of conceiving and working with the masculine and feminine healing. And I didn't get it at that time. I just wasn't ready. But several years later, I saw this image and the lights came on. Everything I've discussed today, in some way, is contained within this image. And this is the discovery chart for Cheroklo. Who is she? Well, Heather, you're perhaps much better at explaining that, but essentially, she's the wife of Chiron. She was discovered in 1997. So we already had Chiron discovered 20 years previously, and he became famous as the wounded healer, and his archetype is deeply entrenched into what happened in our consciousness since then. And now she comes on the scene quietly. And when I saw this image and I realized the star tetrahedron is contained in that image beautifully, that's a message for me. This is when I started to understand that Chiron and Cheroklo, in terms of astronomy, they live close together, just beyond Saturn. She's his wife. If it wasn't for her, he couldn't have done what he did in his journey. These have become the archetypes for what I am now working with as the potential for healing between the masculine and feminine. And she holds a special place in my heart. Yeah.
It's so beautiful, Ron, because they do integrate then a more masculine energy of healing with a more feminine energy of healing. And Melanie Reinhardt and I just did a whole conversation about the healing centaurs and the different orbits of Chiron and Cheroklo. But what's so extraordinary about her energy, it is about holding sacred space. It is about bearing witness and that power of holding the energy of truly hearing and seeing the other.
Yes.
And from my perspective and my experience as a clinical psychologist, when you're in that frequency, there is just this healing energetic field that emanates. It is about coming back into the heart and emanating that energy of love and healing that holds and affects everything around you.
Just before we came on, we talked briefly, and I mentioned just how much I've come to understand the operation of something I call right divine time. And the introduction of Chiron and now Cheroklo into consciousness. This is all perfect timing. And of course, now you and Melanie are starting to describe more about some of the other centaurs. All of this information, this is a beautiful play that is being revealed as we go deeper into all of this.
So beautiful, so powerful, and so such a reminder that we are held and guided and supported in this transition that we're in, and this transformation into being beings of light, homo luminous ones. Ron, we will talk again. You have such wisdom and such amazing knowledge to share, and I'd love to do a conversation with you again. But thank you for what you've shared today and for the profound work that you're doing.
What an honor. What an honor just to talk with you at any time, Heather.
Right. Well, blessings to you and
And
blessings and love to all of you in the community. Thank you.